How good is not being able to breathe? G'day viewers, if you do not recognise that phrasing, you're maybe not an Australian, because the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, affectionately known as Scummo to one and all because of what worthless fucking scum he is, he loves saying, how good is this? How good is this? And this week, most notably in New South Wales, huge swaths of the state are not able to breathe with any degree of ease. I am particularly lucky at the moment. Living in Melbourne, I'm largely not affected by raging bushfires. It's inevitable that will be different by the end of summer. But New South Wales generally, and now it's extended to Sydney, has been affected by incredibly severe bushfires very early in the season. Bushfires are traditionally worst through January to March and even April and May. For them to be this bad in November and December is fucking awful. One might say unprecedented, except the scientists who warned us about climate change said, no, this specific thing is going to happen. We were told this would happen, and it's happening. For a couple of weeks now, fires have been burning out of control over large areas of New South Wales. We have between half a dozen and a dozen fires at any given moment being described at emergency levels. And if you're not familiar with Australian bushfire warnings, ever since the catastrophic fires in Victoria about 10 years ago, we introduced a new rating of emergency or catastrophic fires. And what that means is if you are in an area that is declared to be a bushfire emergency, it is too late for you to try and flee the bushfires. The fire is so intense, trying to escape is probably more dangerous than where you are. We get these wacky things like bushfires moving at 60 to 100 kilometres an hour. Bushfires merging to form superfires that virtually explode. So far, we have not had, thankfully, loss of life or property to the extent to what happened in Victoria about 10 years ago. But the threat is so widespread and so intense. And this is always the thing. For the last couple of weeks, I've been saying, and it's expected to get worse. We are not past the worst of these fires in New South Wales, to a lesser extent Queensland and a few other places. People in Sydney cannot fucking breathe. School children are being told, you are not allowed to go outside and play because exerting yourself and breathing really heavily is very, very, very bad for your health with the smoke haze that we are getting from these fires. This is what is literally happening in Australia. School kids are being told if you breathe too much, that is bad for you. And the government continues to not make a fucking statement because they are so wedded to the coal industry. They are so wedded to their climate change denial that they can't bring themselves to say, Jesus, this is kind of fucked, isn't it? If this is going to happen every summer, Australia is going to become uninhabitable. Ooh, geez. These scientists telling us that major population centres are going to get 50-degree Celsius temperatures in summer if we don't take radical action. Ooh, the federal government doesn't really want to own up to that because, I'll let you in on a secret now, humans cannot survive that type of temperature. Historically, more people have died of cold in winter than of heat in summers. You do get people killed by heat waves and you get people killed by cold fronts. What tended to happen, particularly people with less money, and this is notably the elderly and the less well off, can't afford to keep their heating on, and they tend to die because of the cold in winter. We are right at the tipping point now where that's going to completely flip, and people are going to die because of heat waves in summer. People do die of heat waves now, and they have historically, but it's about to flip to where the common thing is a really significant number of people die every summer because of heat waves. And it's what does my head in. We know what's causing it. We know what the solution is. But governments and corporations around the world are in massive denial about what they're doing. And so I guess what we're looking at before we fast forward to a Mad Max hellscape future is, well, initially an enormous number of brown people dying and having their island nations flooded. And if you think a refugee crisis is bad now, when we see literally tens of millions of climate refugees just swarming across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas, it's gonna be pretty hellish. And it does my head in that we know what the cause is. We know what we need to do to lessen the impact of this, yet we are being lied to by governments and corporations who insist that this is not an emergency. This is not an existential threat to human civilization. But it is. And we're just getting, honestly, what is happening in New South Wales, Melbourne, Sydney now is a mild example of it. Lots of fires, lots of smoke, people's health being damaged. That is literally a mild version of the climate emergency that we are facing in the coming 50 years. So that's cheerful, isn't it? That's why I have been drinking all this evening, because it's fucking horrific. A bunch of people have asked me this week, beyond Australia, like, what do I think? Oh, what do I think of Donald Trump in NATO? Well, that's been quite the fucking adventure. The NATO talks in England, with the UK elections coming up. Obviously, the Tories are trying very hard to lie through their teeth and say they haven't already been negotiating trade deals with the US that involve selling off the NHS to American health insurance companies, which will result in England seeing the same sort of health system that the US has, which results in tens of thousands of people going bankrupt every year because of medical expenses. It's the thing, when the Tories say this isn't happening, when they got Trump to lie and say he wasn't interested in getting US health insurance companies to buy into the NHS, that's a lie. I have to admit, I was kind of impressed with how much Trump stayed on message, because, I mean, he was lying, but he was consistently staying on message and saying, oh, we don't care if they offered us on a silver platter. We're not going to take it. And see, Trump is the typical liar in as much as he takes the lie too far. If he just said, the NHS is an English thing, it's nothing to do with us, that would be one thing. But to say a ridiculous, exaggerated lie like, oh, if they offered it up to us on a silver platter, we wouldn't take it. Despite the fact months previously he'd said, no, the NHS is on the table with trade discussions with the UK post-Brexit. It's just, I don't know how many people are being taken in by this lie, but if you're being taken in by this lie, you are an absolute fucking moron. And the other thing people ask me about Trump is, yes, it was hilarious when world leaders were caught on video shit-talking him. The British royal family and Canadian leader and the French leader and other European leaders basically saying, isn't Trump a fucking disaster? How embarrassing is he? And Trump ran away from the NATO talks early because he was upset that the other kids were mean to him. This is the one that Trump supporters somehow convince themselves that the guy they idolize, he's tough. He's the tough guy. He's out there. And he literally runs off and cries like a fucking baby when people are verbally mean to him. Despite the fact he shit talks and insults everyone under the sun. When people rather mildly say, oh my God, isn't he fucking embarrassing? He runs off screaming and crying like a fucking baby. I cannot process how Trump supporters don't suffer fatal brain hemorrhages from cognitive dissonance in convincing themselves Trump is strong and brave and dynamic, while seeing that he's weak and pathetic and scared and insecure and an absolute loser and suffering extreme cognitive impairment. I honestly do not understand how they're not all dying from fatal brain hemorrhages, because that level of cognitive dissonance is just incredibly hard to hold in your head. To reject all the actual evidence in front of you and assert statements that are the complete opposite of what everyone else can see. Absolutely mind-boggling. But who am I to criticise Trump or Trump supporters when Australian Prime Minister Scummo is a slavish worshipper of Trump? It's absolutely embarrassing. He tries to imitate Trump. That is what's worse than Trump, is someone who tries to imitate Trump. And here in Australia, we have a climate change denying, science rejecting, fucking lunatic who is so pathetic and so worthless that his goal in life is to be a pale, pathetic shadow imitation of Donald Trump. And that's the reality that I'm living in.